Representative Cori Bush was asked yesterday whether she wants to see President Biden run for a second term in 2024. Here's what she had to say.
Do you want to see Joe Biden run for a second term?
She's going to go.
Yeah, that's an easy question. It's not going to take long. Do you want to see Joe Biden run?
I don't want to answer that question because we have not, I don't want to answer that question.
Okay.
He's the president and he has the right to run for a second term. Absolutely.
But I
don't want to, I'd rather you not do that answer.
You got like 2 minutes to be in the car.
Yeah, I know. I got to get to the.
Well, thanks very much.
The other thing.
Oh boy, Progressive Political Action Group, Roots Action, has announced their newest campaign hashtag, Don't Run Joe, to stop the president's renomination for the Democratic ticket in 2024. The campaign is set to launch the day after this year's midterm elections. Organizers say, quote, unfortunately, President Biden has been neither bold nor inspiring, and his prospects for winning re-election appear to be bleak. With so much at stake, making him the Democratic Party's standard bearer in 2024 would be a tragic mistake. Here with us now to expand on the Don't Run Joe campaign is co-founder of Roots Action, Norman Solomon. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks a lot.
All right. So, Cori Bush's answer there is a bit of a mess. It's obvious what she thinks. She's a progressive. Joe Biden was not her choice. She supported Bernie Sanders in the primary. But there does seem to be this power held even over the most progressives in Congress that they are not allowed to say out loud what so many Americans have articulated in polls, which is that they don't want Joe Biden to run. What success do you see your organization having in helping to break through the Democratic stranglehold on who gets to decide the Democratic Party nominee?
Right now, in the last 2 weeks since we announced don'trunjoe.org, there's been a breaking of the dam. The logjam is beginning to fall apart. And the gap that you referred to between the polling of the Democrats in the country and the punditocracy that covers politics out of Washington, and for that matter, Democrats in Congress, that gap is just becoming huge. It's becoming more obvious. So I think that the contradiction certainly should be resolved by the voters having their say. And the voters are clearly wanting Joe Biden to get out of the way, that he should announce that he will be voluntarily a one-term president. And that opens up the possibility of a progressive nominee. Clearly, Biden would not, based on his record, be a progressive nominee. So that's where our future is, to get the logjam named President Biden out of the way for 2024. And then, as Roots Action did in supporting Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020, progressives could go at it and get a real progressive nominee.
That's not an easy thing, though, right? There's not an obvious successor to Joe Biden, period, let alone a progressive one. Despite Joe Biden's falling popularity with a lot of key demographics, it doesn't seem like the Democrats have someone else who's super popular to offer up, unless you're going to say that Bernie Sanders should go at it again, despite maybe the age issue with him. So what is the strategy to actually find someone other than Biden to be a candidate?
Well, the strategy first is to do grassroots organizing. If it's a resolution from the top down, then we're going to have a sort of boilerplate process, and Biden's going to be the nominee. It wasn't an easy thing in 1967 when Lyndon Johnson was going to be renominated for president of the United States. And it took first building movements from the grassroots, and second, at a certain point, in that case, Eugene McCarthy as a candidate, stepping forward and going into the snows of New Hampshire, and the rest is history. We had basically an abdication in terms of the next term. There's an old song that goes, everyone wants to go to heaven and nobody wants to die. And we are going to have to bring about some courage from some progressives in Congress to begin to speak out. And that courage, as always, or I should say almost always, is not going to come from Capitol Hill. It's going to come from people who live around the country, who see what's at stake. And that's a big distinction between the way the pundits have been going and this Don't Run Joe movement, because we're aware that the problem is not age. The problem is policy, and the problem is record. When today Joe Biden could cancel student debt, totaling $1.7 trillion with the stroke of a pen. He can't blame Sinema, can't blame Manchin. He's not doing it. He's not using the bully pulpit to address the poverty and near poverty, the healthcare crisis in this country. He's not really going at the climate emergency. He intentionally threw Build Back Better under the congressional bus by breaking his previous pledge to make sure that it would go in tandem with the infrastructure bill that Republicans wanted. And so time after time, we're seeing that we're not getting the leadership that we need out of the White House.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that there are specific things that Joe Biden could do that he can't offshore responsibility onto Manchin and Sinema for, including student debt cancellation. There are promises that he has broken that he had control over, like the choice to bifurcate the infrastructure bill. Those are solid points, and I think that those are galvanizing to people who really understand that that is, those things were in Biden's purview. My concern is that given the nature of mainstream media, the average American really genuinely does believe that Biden is not the average Democrat, rather, doesn't believe that Biden is at fault, even if they are frustrated with his performance and rate him low in terms of polls. And the number one tool that establishment Democrats have always had at their disposal is threatening people with the Republican alternative. And while I really appreciate the idea of, it needing to be a grassroots effort, my concern is that even people who have demonstrated their willingness to engage in the kind of grassroots campaigns that Bernie Sanders won might be reluctant to do so and have hope and even risk, the spoiler outcome if they don't see a plausible candidate that could rise to the challenge and actually replace Joe Biden, who would be better than Joe Biden. And so I wonder how you've been addressing people's concerns that, Joe Biden is the best person to beat, whatever Republican is chosen by the Republican Party. And also, if you have people in mind who would be good progressive candidates to draw upon in this moment.
Well, first, you're not going to get anywhere if the logjam doesn't move. And as long as Joe Biden is the logjam, then we don't have the possibility of a better, hopefully a very, very much better candidate. Don't Run Joe is a campaign to get the logjam out of the way. We're not a stalking horse for somebody else. Clearly, Roots Action's record is clear. We worked very hard at grassroots levels, much of it digitally, to get the nominee in 2016 and 2020 to be Bernie Sanders. That's our politics. But we know that those politics can't prevail in terms of the nomination until we have not the status quo Joe running again.
Okay, but hear me out. Everybody who knows me knows that I'm extremely supportive of this, and I don't need an alternative to not be supportive of Joe Biden. But the reality is, there could be, say, if your campaign were successful, a Pete Buttigieg presidency instead of a Joe Biden presidency. And some people might say, well, at least Joe Biden's at the end of his political tenure. Do we want to saddle ourselves with a Buttigiegian dynasty, the likes of which could
I wouldn't worry
rival...
about that too much. I think you're going to end up with the DeSantis dynasty if you do this. But
well, either way,
I would
those
lose
are
too much sleep.
I think that either those alternatives are, to someone like me who's a progressive, either of those alternatives is kind of galling and could cause people if not to want to support Joe, to still not necessarily engage with a campaign like yours. How do you reconcile that?
Well, we're walking through an algorithm that nothing is guaranteed. As you said, the mainstream media at every turn, they're blocking and have been blocking an understanding of what is at stake with progressive politics. These are existential threats right now for poor people, for the healthcare crisis, for the climate crisis, and so on and so forth. So, of course, we can't depend on mainstream media. There's no guarantee that we will win future battles. But if we don't win the first battle to get Biden out of the way, we know what is guaranteed. We're going to have a race for somebody who would be defending an indefensible status quo. And progressives have a dual responsibility all the time, which is to defeat the racists, the xenophobes, the misogynists, the right wing, the neo-fascist Republican Party. We always have to have that as one of our two main priorities. The other is to fight for a progressive agenda, Medicare for all, demilitarization of the police, cancel student debt, get the president off of his duff, as the saying goes, to use the bully pulpit to fight for people instead of corporations.
Well, Norman, we really appreciate you joining us. Provocative stuff.
Thanks.
Thank you. We'll have more Rising right after this.